Hi all, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Jack Ardrey and I will be moderating today's program, which is brought to you by Charles IT. Charles IT is a leading compliance expert and managed IT service provider in Connecticut. We are recording today's session, so all attendee lines are muted. After the webinar concludes, attendees will receive an email that provides a copy of the presentation and a link to the recording of today's webinar. Our program will begin with a presentation. Following this presentation, we will have a question and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the presentation via the Q&A button on your screen. We have a large audience with us today, so our presenter will likely not get to all of your questions. He will work to follow up on those questions that he does not have the opportunity to address. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Foster Charles. Foster is the founder and CEO of Charles IT, as well as one of our high-level compliance experts. Foster has grown the company from a business that he started in high school to a team of 42 passionate people located in downtown Middletown, Connecticut. Foster has been focusing on highly regulated industries for years now and has an experienced background in helping businesses of all sizes to prepare for their respective compliances. I will now turn the floor over to Foster.
Hi, everyone. So again, I'm Foster. I'm the CEO and founder of Charles IT, and what we're reviewing today is SOC 2 compliance. So this is the quick overview of topics that we're looking at. So we have SOC 2 background, where did it start, where did it come from, the types of SOC 2 compliance. There's type 1 and type 2. And I'll quickly hit what the heck is a SOC 1 versus a SOC 2 versus a SOC 3. Then we're going to touch on why does a business need a SOC 2 certification in the first place, the trust service criteria, which are like the foundational principles of what a SOC 2 is based on. Then quickly hit on how you get started, what a gap assessment looks like, which is something that we recommend doing before you dive into the SOC 2 world. Then we'll hit on what does remediation look like, filling in those gaps that might come out from that gap assessment. And then an audit process of how do you maintain a SOC 2 certification. Then we'll end it with some Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them up. I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. And then we'll touch on a few closing thoughts from there. So first and foremost, what the heck is a SOC 2? A SOC 2, basically what happened was a bunch of accountants got together, they established the AICPA, and they came up with a specific criteria of what a SOC 2 certification or compliance looks like. So these are a third-party guaranteed global kind of set list of instructions and things that you should be following in order to be SOC 2 certified. It's based off of what they call 5 trust service criteria, and those criteria are how you're ranked. So you have these families of what they call controls that you need to make sure that you're actually validating to, that yes, I in fact do have a backup, or yes, we do follow these basic processes repeatedly. And then a little bit more about SOC. There are actual more than just a SOC 2. SOC 2 is probably the most popular that you'll see out there. So there's other SOCs. So there's a SOC 1, which is a audit of internal controls. So internal controls, really when you're going after a SOC 1 certification, is that you are providing them your internal processes, procedures, and they're auditing your own procedures for it. Then there's the SOC 2, which we'll be going over today, which is a guaranteed list of procedures provided by the AICPA, and they tell you exactly what those controls need to be and whether you're applying to them or not. So SOC 1 is your own controls, somebody auditing you against, and it's really focused around financial statements, and that's the primary objective. SOC 2 are the third-party set, and there's this lovely last one called a SOC 3. So a SOC 3 is really a publicly facing document of what a SOC 2 would be. So a SOC 2 is really a confidential document. It's not something I'm going to go and post on the internet and be like, hey, SOC 2 and here's all my stuff. There's a little bit of secret sauce that you might have in there. There's different processes that you have that might be proprietary. It's a confidential document. So if we're going to send one of our clients our SOC 2 audit, we ask them to sign an NDA before doing so. But a SOC 3 is really more for the general public. It's something you could post online. It's used for marketing, customer assurance, that kind of stuff. So SOC 1, internal, testing your own. SOC 2, it's a third-party set of controls. And SOC 3 is, hey, I can give this out to the public, and it's a publicly facing document. The last part about the SOC 2 is the trust criteria. We'll go into them in depth a little bit later on, but it's security. What's the security of these things? Availability, process integrity, confidentiality, or privacy. So those are all the different trust criteria that can be a part of. So now that we've gone over what's a SOC 1, SOC 2, and SOC 3, what are the different types of SOC 2? So just to get a little bit more complicated for you, there are two types of a SOC 2. So there's a SOC 2 Type 1. So SOC 2 Type 1, it basically shows you where you are in any given point of time. So like I can say, hey, Mr. Customer, here's my SOC 2 audit, and it says as of February 9th, I followed all these controls. It is a point in time reference that somebody can come and say, hey, I followed all these controls as of that time. That somebody said as of February 9th, all these things were followed from the last point in time that they've done. So SOC 2 Type 1 is one point in time, one kind of frame of reference, and it really is there to say, hey, where do we need to improve, determine what your maturity level is overall, and then validate basically what your current efforts have been to date. So it's a great way of entering into the SOC 2 arena. Now there's SOC 2 Type 2. Charles IT goes after SOC 2 Type 2, and what this is adherence over throughout a period of time. So an audited period of time is average is 6 months. We do a year, so it's rolling. And so it's an audited controls over 6 months. So let me give you an example. One of the things a SOC 2 might go and audit you on is your new employee onboarding process. A SOC 2 Type 1 will say, show me your last one, and did you follow the process that you had? A SOC 2 Type 2 will say, show me everybody you onboarded in this past 6 months. And they'll pick random people from it and say, show me you followed it for all of those random people. It's a whole different level of in-depth and making sure that you're following it consistently versus a SOC 2 Type 1 is a point in time. So Type 2, large periods of time, randomized. You know that anybody doing a SOC 2 Type 2 has been following this process diligently from the time of the audit period that was there. So there's some benefits to achieving a SOC 2 Type 2. So it's a much higher kind of customer trust and brand reputation, and there's a higher level of security, maturity, and it reduces your organization's risk. Just take it from the business owner perspective of this is I know that the policies that we have in place are actually being followed by my own team. So when we decommission a potential employee or I'm provisioning a new employee, that the process that we laid out is followed every single time, and we're not getting it right 80% of the time. It's followed right 100% of the time. So with that, why does my business need a SOC 2 certification? So there's a couple of different reasons. One, again, as a business owner, what we said before is I'm just far more comfortable knowing I have a third party coming in and auditing that my business is following the procedures and laid out to a third party standard. It's not what we said we're doing. This third party is coming in and stamping my company and saying, yep, they're in fact doing that. The other one, B2B organizations, they need to demonstrate security in order to do business. So we see a lot of clients requiring SOC 2 reports by their vendors in order to keep doing business with them. And we see this in large organizations. So we have one client that has a contract with Verizon. We have another contract that just has a contract, another client that has a contract with the state. We have another client that just has a nationwide vendor, and they're asking, they do work for that vendor, and that client requires anybody doing work with them to have a SOC 2 certification. They want to make sure that the data that they're sharing with their vendors stays secure at all times. So basically, they know that all the security, whether that their customers are trusting them with, all their vendors are following to the same standards. Another reason you do it, if you're anything like us, one of the main reasons we did it years ago was the questionnaires and security checks for the everybody gets these different checks and things from vendors. They're these security questionnaires. We have a lot of clients that send it to us. It's a risk control, and one of the best things you can do is hand them back a SOC 2 audit. So we literally, the SOC 2 audit for us is probably paid for itself in the amount of time that we save in just filling out those silly security questionnaires. We fill them out all the time. We do it for our clients all the time, but we wanted to be able to say, hey, Mr. Auditor, here's our SOC 2. Please ask us if you have any questions beyond that. And a lot of times those questionnaires and security checks go away. Another reason, contracts. This is what I touched before. In order to sign a lot of new contracts, we see a surprising amount of vendors and clients now requiring this of their vendors. So, hey, I'm going to do business with you, but they want to make sure they're not taking risk with their business with their vendors. So again, what those trust criteria, which we'll touch on in the next couple of slides, is making sure that that company will be there, that they're following their processes, that they keep their data confidential. Those are why people are starting to lay these into contracts. And with the amount of security issues and ransomware and all this stuff going on, it's becoming more and more important for everybody to make sure that your vendors and clients are protected. And then the last part is it reduces a barrier in the sales process. A lot of people say, how do we trust you? What's going on? What are your processes? That sales cycles, hey, we're SOC 2 certified. People put it on their websites a lot, and a lot of major carriers will actually see it. So we have it as a part of our sales cycle, usually in a risk assessment. Before people can sign off on that contract, usually some risk assessment comes through, and it just reduces the sales cycle as well. So next is the trust criteria. So there are 5 basic trust criteria, and this is what the SOC 2 actually audits. These are the families of controls. So the first one we're going to touch on is security. So security is the baseline for all SOC 2 reports. So that baseline is the design for must-haves. You have to have it. It's the core to what SOC 2 is, and it fuels all the other trust criteria. And basically what security is testing things like antivirus, passwords, best practices, so that you're keeping data safe, but also physical controls. So like our SOC 2 will commonly look for fire suppression systems or smoke detectors or a security system, or do you have a guard? So security is this core function of what SOC 2 is based. Is the data secure? Are people doing things in a secure fashion? And services that we end up usually finding are missing are forms like multi-factor authentication. It prevents that unwanted access, and that multi-factor stuff is, again, what you see in banks when you log into your bank account and somebody sends you that text message, or you have that little keychain that has those 6 numbers that keep rotating. That's multi-factor authentication. The next, availability. The trust criteria for availability is basically making sure that your service and what you're providing is going to be up and running. So are you evaluating your current capacity? So whether I'm providing IT services and do I have enough employees, am I evaluating that I have enough team members to be able to service our clients? Or are my backups and the availability for my organization? If a disaster hit, my building blows up, if it gets wiped off the face of the earth, will my business continue to be able to provide support to my clients? And then are you testing that annually? That's a huge component that we always find missing in the backup section of it. And then the disaster recovery. Okay, if the building doesn't exist for the next month, will the business continue to operate? Is that tested? Is that there? If they delete all their files, is that there? How's that working? It's one of the main reasons that you see so many people go after cloud environments. The cloud environments or data centers, they don't want the servers in-house. You know that it's really just a landing zone for my employees, and all the actual core infrastructure that allows us to maintain our clients isn't stored in my office. So it's really about testing that your company is ready to stand the test of time. The backup, the redundancy, if you're using vendors, if you're a vendor, that your services are always going to be available. And again, what we do as a part of it is we're testing your backup and disaster recovery. Those are the services and things that we do. A lot of SOC 2 audit items end up falling back down to IT and making sure that they have all their I's dotted and T's crossed. The next, progress integrity. So progress integrity is, this is the data that you might be capturing and making sure that it's done in the same way every single time. It's done in a correct way and in a valid way, and that the data can't be changed after the fact. So this is ensuring that applications can't go sideways and all of a sudden like blow away people's data, or maybe you have something where you're capturing people's information in a form and it consolidates, or you get duplicates, or that there's some controls that who's accessing that data. It's the integrity of the processes that your organization is following. This is super crucial for software companies. So like in the next for performing transactions. So if you're processing on behalf of your clients, you're taking in that vendor data. Remember, maybe I have a contract with the state. The state feeds me a lot of information. I need to capture that information. I have to make sure that I don't manipulate it in a way that could create a false product. I have to make sure that we're handling the data the same way every single time. And I need to make sure that it can't be invalidated for some other reason. So basically, process integrity. Are the processes there that are repeatable and reliable every single time? This is very important for anybody who's manipulating data, software companies, data processing companies, but anytime you're handling data and what that process is. The other part on the process integrity is internally, making sure that you internally are doing it, going back to the employee onboarding and offboarding process. Is that being followed the same way every single time? Next is confidentiality. So confidentiality, a whole set of family controls. Is the data being, sensitive data being stored correctly? Is it encrypted? Is it, if somebody, the most common issue to have is, I left the laptop on top of my car, drove away, it's now on the road. Did somebody pick up that laptop? Is that data encrypted? And you'd be surprised how many clients come to us and say, well, I have a password on my laptop. That password definitely does not cover the encryption of personal data. A bunch of geeky IT guys can easily get to the data if you just have a password protecting it. It needs to be encrypted and make sure it's there. Really, a lot of times where this is focused on is personable identifiable information. A lot of people call PII or PHI, protected health information. And so this is where it's absolutely critical, making sure that that information is being stored. Anywhere you're being trusted with third-party data, going back to that state example, is that data encrypted? Is it secure? Is it not going to fall into the wrong hands? A lot of that stuff is intellectual property or confidential, and we want to make sure that we're handling that and the right controls are in place to keep that data confidential. Outside of just confidentiality, number one problem that we probably find in here, data disposal. So everybody just, hey, I want to get rid of the computer. I throw it away. I sell it on eBay. Oh, I formatted the computer, so it's good. Not usually. You have to dispose of it in the proper way, and just having real processes and policies in place to do that. So we have a policy in place that says this is where we store the data internally, like people's hard drives. This is it sensitive or not? Does it need to be in a safe? Does it need to be destroyed? How we dispose of it? What are the acceptable methods to doing it? How quickly do we get that done? And then do we recycle it? what do you do with it there? So data disposal is super important. Next part of it, confidentiality, breach notification process. Another big topic. Most people don't have a proper incident response policy or know, do I need to notify anybody of a breach? Let's say you don't fall under HIPAA. Let's say you don't fall under any true compliance. Having your own process of saying, when do we actually notify a client that something happened? We got ransomware. Somebody was in our system. Should we notify a client? Should we notify the insurance company? When do I use my cyber liability insurance? Those are all questions that come out through the breach notification process. A SOC 2 audit brings it back into that and saying, what's your process? What does it look like? Are you following it? Have you had to follow it? Show us examples. And what we do to provide confidentiality is endpoint encryption. Going back to that laptop falls off the back of the car, it gets stolen out of somebody's vehicle or out of their backpack, or that somebody's house is broken into. These are all real stories that we've had from clients that encryption, we can show it was encrypted, the laptop isn't turned on, all the data is secure. Even when you plugging it in and putting it into a flash drive or a USB, like how many flash drives have you randomly found that might have something on it or that are rolling around your house and you're like, oh yeah, I had this document on there. It's how we handle that. Our endpoint encryption is thinking about all endpoints, whether it's a portable hard drive, a USB drive, a laptop, server, wherever that data may be. Next is privacy, last but not least. So privacy, it's all about collecting and using that data and how you're doing it. So you'll see those lovely privacy policies that are written on websites. They're there for a reason. If you look to our own website, privacy policy. This is becoming tons and tons of stuff is coming out in the news, in law. So GDPR came out in the EU and saying what people's rights have of their own privacy, where that data is going and being sold to. And there's a lot of legislature going on of what the United States should do, or all of North America as a pact. You'll see people leading it right now, specifically California is probably the most comprehensive of, hey, I need to know where that data is. I have the right to be deleted, so I don't want you tracking me anymore. And you have to be able to track and manage that data of who has access to it, what is disclosed, what consent did I provide, what am I allowing people to do that? Apple recently made big news because they're forcing when the app opens up, who has access to it, who's tracking you, and these things are coming up as you're installing apps. So it's super important as you hold customers' personal information or even any information. California, Texas, Tennessee, New York, Massachusetts, they all have laws stating what that would be. New York and California in particular being the most comprehensive, and they're using Nexus as an example of that. So what that really is that if I do business with anybody in the state of New York, I'm eligible to fall under that compliance. So these things are now starting to pass state law, and your privacy policy, the right to be deleted, being able to have the processes in place to do that is tricky. You want a tricky one, okay, I have customer XYZ, they work in New York because that's where my client is, and they say, hey, I want to be deleted, I don't want anything there. How do I remove that out of every database you have, out of your marketing database, out of your CRM? Okay, maybe let's say you magically be able to pull them out of that. What about your backups? How far do your backups go? Do you spin up those backups and remove them out of there? That's what the privacy trust criteria is really focusing on, is how do I collect data? How am I keeping it private, confidential? Who has access to it? What are my processes and policies in place? And how do I keep track of all that? Things that we do to make sure, simple things like external vulnerability scanning, making sure that there's no, what we try to protect is just by doing business with us, is I call it gross negligence support. How do I make sure that you're protected against gross negligence claims? And then we try to push to a SOC 2 or CSF or HIPAA, one of these compliances, to make sure that they're following these best practices. But we do simple external vulnerability scanning to make sure that you don't have something silly open. A good example of that, the big Target breach that everybody was concerned about. Target got breached. because they didn't do external vulnerability scanning, and the HVAC company left a port open to the public. That is what actually breached the system, gave them access to what they needed to, and they got access to the rest of the target network because an HVAC company left that port open. Again, comes under privacy. So those are all the basic trust criteria. How do I get started? Some people are like, "Ooh, this is a good idea. We should do this." It's relatively simple. Step one, gap assessment. What's my gaps? Finding that. I'll go to that in a little detail in 1 second. Step two, it's filling those gaps. The security services. What security service do I need? Do I have that external vulnerability scanning? Do I have that encryption? Do I have that backup device? Your own policy review. This is usually the biggest thing that we see as the number one limiting thing is you should have probably about 27 different policies outside of your handbook of what should happen and when. And then going into that process review and saying, okay, have we filled those gaps? And then step three, which is the SOC 2 audit. So we go through and we assist you through the audit process. So I don't know where I am, I do the gap, we look at all those gaps, start filling them, and then once you're confident that you filled them, we'll actually guide you and hold your hand through the audit process and go and work with that third party to get you that piece of paper, that stamp of approval that says, yes, I'm SOC 2 certified. So, quick detail in here, gap analysis. What is step one? What the heck is a gap analysis? So it's assessing your current security state. We determine the gaps, the holes in your business, the security posture of it. We determine what that remediation plan is for it. And why the heck should I even do this? It's really about, you want to find your gaps first. You don't want to go and spend $15,000 to $25,000 for that third party to come and do this full assessment and then have gaps in your report. You have what they call exceptions in the report. Everybody, when you get a SOC 2 report, and we get it from our clients because we do our due diligence against them, our clients and vendors, you fly to the back page. It's kind of like a sales proposal. You go to the back page and say, okay, what's the final kind of clause? There they list all the exceptions in that report. What you want to do is do a gap analysis. So when you do go and pay for it, you don't have any of those gaps. A gap analysis will cost your organization anywhere from, let's say you've gone through a SOC 2 audit before, type 2, this is just another year to be able to do your SOC 2 type 2, maybe $8,000 to $10,000 to go through, collect all the evidence and handle all that. And then up to $25,000 if I have no idea where I am, I want to get to that component and where do I move forward. Step two, the remediation plan, filling in those gaps. So what the heck does that look like? Gaps can be found in security, policy, maintaining those services that have it. So processes is a huge part of it. All right, I have the policy, this is what we're supposed to do. Are we following it? And figuring out what those things are. So one, you have to fill in those gaps in your security posture, like simple, like do we have locks on the server room door? Do we have a security system? Some of those basics, fire alarm, that fun, but also on the technology side. So there's a surprising amount of controls that get brought into this. So review your in-house processes and then saying, okay, do we have that multi-factor encryption? Do we have the multi-factor authentication? Do we have encryption? Do we have security awareness training where we're just alerting people into that? So the multi-factor is the bank and making sure that people are authenticating as who they say they are. Encryption is making sure that all the devices are encrypted. So if that flash drive or that computer falls into the wrong hands, that it's secure. Security awareness training is where we actually go and do here are the things to be aware of. Here are the common things people fall for. How do I know if this is a phishing email or something legitimate? And we train people to do that. Then they have something called SIM. SIM is after the fact. So let's say somebody did get into your system. This is after the fact awareness of tracking history, all the logs. What did they touch? Did this person break into my computer system to mine Bitcoin because they thought they can make some money, or were they actually hunting for confidential information that they're going to go and sell on the dark web? A SIM tells you exactly what happened, how they got in, when they got in, what they touched. It's after the fact component to it, and it's very useful. It also has other business benefits. Speaking from a business owner's perspective, I want to know what every employee is putting to that flash drive. Maybe I have some intellectual property that I spent years of my life investing in, and for somebody to go and take that property and bring it to a competitor, or maybe they are deciding to go out on their own because I'm an architecture firm and they're taking all these renderings and drawings with them. I want to know what they're taking and what they're not. And then last but not least, of course, is backup and disaster recovery. A lot of people have backup, they can restore a file, but they're completely unaware on how long it would actually take to get their systems back up and running. And the two great questions to ask is, okay, if my whole server fails, that box in the corner over there, like I go pour my coffee on it, how long would it take to bring that back up? And two, what happens if my whole building burns down? How long would it be until my business can be back up and running? And those are key things for insurance, key things for like my own peace of mind so I can sleep well at night. And this is all things that all are specific things called out in a SOC 2 audit. So do you have multi-factor? Are things encrypted at rest or in transit? Are you making your employees aware of the security vulnerabilities? Are you logging access and controls to things? Do you have a plan for backup? These aren't just things that we were like, oh, we would love to sell you these services. You will have gaps in your SOC 2 if you don't have all of these services. And then step 3, the SOC 2 audit assistance. This is the actual, hey, let's go get that certification. Let's get that piece of paper, that stamp of approval, the thing I'm going to go show all my clients. And honestly, like when I break open the bottle of champagne, because that process is over and we've gone through that long process to get there, that's the part that that's the SOC 2 audit. It's actually getting the audit done. So so what we can do to provide for clients is we can recommend actually SOC 2 auditors. We're there to hold your hand through the entire process, from the gap assessment to helping select the auditor to the evidence collection to just giving you advice on what to do and what the auditor might be looking for, and help verify that your controls are actually effective. We have people who have door access control systems, but they have no way of figuring out who opened the door and when, because it's a part of the building that they lease, and making sure those processes are there. We don't want a SOC 2 audit to take people away from running their business. It is not something for the weak. This is not something that you want to just take on lightly. It's definitely something that you're going to invest into, and we want to make sure that you have no exceptions. So we don't want to make sure, we're here to hold your hand through the process, to guide you through it. So 1, it's not stressful. 2, you have the right auditor that has your interest in mind and not somebody that's just looking to be a cold auditor and tell you what that is, and they can give you that guidance. And then the evidence collection of like, what the heck does this control mean, and what do they need for evidence to be able to collect it? And then helping you guide through it so you can focus on running your business, and we'll focus on the SOC 2. So again, a SOC 2 audit for our support can be a few $1,000s up to, if you want us to do it from soup to nuts, can be $20,000 or $30,000, where you're kind of setting it and forgetting it, and you're letting Charles IT manage it. And then you have the auditor to pay for as well, which can be anywhere from $8,000 to $25,000 to go and do those controls. Most people want to know the timeline. So timeline, typically in a SOC 2 Type 2, there's a 12-month process for a full initial audit to roll through. Because what happens is that you begin the engagement. Hey, here's the goal line. I want to be SOC 2 certified. You begin that. We do a gap assessment. Gap assessment will probably take an internal organization probably 30 to 40 hours of your time, and probably about 200 to 300 hours of our time. We try to make it as painless as possible, but there's certain things that we just won't be able to pull from your own organization. There's everything from financial statements to they want logos to org charts and that kind of information. And so that's the gap assessment. We're pulling all this information, making sure it's all there. That's 40 hours of your time, about 200 hours of ours. Then we'll remediate. The remediation process is as bad as your gap assessment comes out to be, but you'll know exactly where you stand, what you need to do. As a part of our gap assessment, we go and say, hey, you should absolutely go for a SOC 2 Type 2. You're going to pass with flying colors, or ooh, let's go for a SOC 2 Type 1. We even have it set up with auditors that you can go for a SOC 2 Type 2, and if you're not having a great report, you can back down to a SOC 2 Type 1, so you have minimal risk. Our job is all these little tricks to our trade to make sure that you get the best possible looking report that's factually accurate to your vendors and clients. So begin the enrollment with us. We do a gap assessment. We tell you how deep the water is. The remediation, we'll tell you all the projects, things you need to do, services you need to implement, policies you need to write. And then as soon as you know how deep that water is and you're confident that all those things are covered, you begin your evaluation and auditing period. So in a SOC 2 Type 1, bang, you could do it day one and say, yep, we have all this stuff. We finished it yesterday. I could have them audit me the next day because I can show that these policies, processes were put in place as this date. And here's only one example. And that one example will pass for a SOC 2 Type 1. If you're a SOC 2 Type 2, you need to go through the audit period. So if you don't have that in line from, let's say it started January 1st and goes to July 1st, that 6-month period. If I didn't have the right process in place on January 15th and a new employee started and that process wasn't followed, that'd be a gap, that would be an exception. Type 1, it's that point in time I can do that. And we can pick it up in the audit and you can say, hey, go fix this. And then I can reasonably state that you have the right policy and process in place. And then once you complete the audit, that audit will take 3 to 4 weeks if you have all your ducks in a row to go through it. If you've done the gap assessment with us, it will need minimal amount of time on your component because we've already collected the evidence, we've done that, and we're just processing and pulling the information. It will need very minimal. If you haven't done the gap assessment with us, again, probably about 40 hours of your time, 200 hours of ours. And then once that's done, you're certified. You get a piece of paper. So the audit period closes, they collect all their information, they go and validate everything, they stamp, they write that document. You'll get draft 1 to make sure there's nothing that you fundamentally disagree with or that was a misunderstanding, and then they'll produce that report usually somewhere between 3 and 4 weeks after the audit period closes and that you've provided them all their information. You get the piece of paper, bam, you're certified. So I know I've talked a lot, so we can probably open it up to some questions and I'll hand it back over to Jack.
Thank you, Foster, for a highly informative presentation. SOC 2 compliance can definitely be a game changer in a business's success, and there have been plenty of key takeaways from this program. With that being said, we'll now begin the Q&A. As a reminder, please submit any questions you have via the Q&A button on your screen. There are a lot of questions, and Foster will likely not get to all of them, but we will work to follow up on those questions that Foster does not have the opportunity to address. So, going forward, our first question that we have here, and it looks like you did touch on this a bit during the presentation, but how much does a typical SOC 2 audit cost?
So, for the latecomer, the SOC 2 audit can cost, there's no like one size fits all cost to it. It includes like the size of your organization, what your operation maturity level is, or do you have all your ducks in a row, and are you following your own policies and processes? If your policies and processes are solid and you have an incident response plan, a data classification plan, mobile device policy plan, you have those things in place. If you're saying, yep, got that, yep, got that, you're probably a very mature organization, and you can probably do an actual gap assessment to make sure that you're not going to have that missing component for about 10 grand. the actual audit being done from a SOC 2 auditor will still be $15,000 to $25,000, depending on the size of the organization, how many things are there, the risk, and honestly, the auditor that you select. One of the big things that we provide is that we have 3 or 4 different auditing companies that we work with, and we know the right one to kind of pair you with that might have specialty in your type of organization, or if you're just new to it, you want to go to a different type of auditor because they might be able to hold your hand through the process. So again, anywhere from $8,000 to $25,000 with the SOC 2 auditor will cost, and on our side, it can be probably a similar range.
Great. Thank you for taking care of that one. The next question that we had was, do you need SOC 2 Type 1 before actually getting SOC 2 Type 2?
That's an awesome question. So you don't need it. That's a no, technically. So a SOC 2 Type 1 and a SOC 2 Type 2, they're not stepping stones. They're independent audits. If you've never gotten a SOC 2 or another major compliance, maybe you're doing an ISO certification, you've gone for CMMC, some CSF, something along those lines, you probably will want to start with a SOC 2 Type 1, largely because it's that point in time and you won't have a terrible looking report for the first time run through, and you can usually live fix things pretty close to when the audit is coming up, and even get feedback from the auditors like, hey, this isn't really what I'm looking for. Can you give me a real policy here? And you can run back and go and write that policy. But if you're confident, again, you're a mature organization, you have those policies, procedures, you have all that, you can try to jump to a SOC 2 Type 2. I recommend most clients go to a SOC 2 Type 1, and then as soon as they complete the SOC 2 Type 1, you start your audit period right off the bat, like the day that closed, and then you carry it all the way through, and you get a SOC 2 Type 2 as soon as the audit period closes.
Awesome. And our final question here that we have time for, is a CPA firm the only one who can carry out a SOC 2 audit for my company?
Yes. CPA firms must carry out your audit. They're the only ones considered legally compliant to be able to do that. So they're the only ones that can actually do that stamp of approval and certify you for a SOC 2 and give you that seal, that document that states that. But a third party like Charles IT, what we do is the gap component to it. So you can use us to prepare for the audit with the gap assessment to tell you what you need to pass the audit from the CPA firm. The third party can also help you attain the security and services you need to fill those gaps. So like the audit firm won't do that. A common misstep that I see is that people go to the CPA firm, say, hey, I want to get SOC 2 audit. They go through it. They have all these exceptions on the report. They just paid a boat ton of money to go and do that, but you don't want to show anybody that report because it doesn't look so good on your organization. So and a lot of times those CPA firms, they might have a tuck-in like IT firm under them, but they're not usually like best in class or really mature organization to offer all those other security services. There's one question here that I just saw pop up that I'd like to answer. We have somebody with 7 offices. Does the audit begin with all the offices? Yes, those offices, you would have everybody included into it. SOC 2 is looking at your organization overall. The only time that you would potentially remove somebody from the audit or certain things not apply is when you have we scope it out. So let's say we had a advertising agency. They were providing sweepstakes information for their vendor. So they did all these sweepstakes that you see, like, hey, pull this. I can go on my box of Cheerios and I can go and win like a car or something. What the SOC 2 was really needed in that scenario was, where's that client's information? Where are they storing it? They're running the sweepstakes, and that's what was required. So because for the vendor contract, they needed the SOC 2 for that, we scoped out large other portions of their business to not be included. That can only really be done if the SOC 2 or the data that you're handling is a separate department, classification, business revenue, something along those lines. This was such a major part of their organization that it was able to be scoped out. Most of the time, all the offices need to be included, all the locations, unless you have a separate line of business that is specifically being audited for that requirement.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking that last second question there. That was great. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions at the moment. If you did submit a question or you would like to submit a question, you do have until the end of the webinar to actually put that in, and then it will be provided to Foster along with your contact information for a follow-up answer. Before we conclude, I would like to give Foster one more opportunity to share some final thoughts. Foster?
I guess my final thoughts for me is, again, why does your business need a SOC 2? The big thing is, for me, I honestly saved a boatload of time for my own team from filling out security questionnaires, risk assessments for my vendors, banks. Like, people wanted some third party that came and validated us, and I can't tell you how much time that has saved us. It was a significant amount. And then the second part was just having it as a resource to be able to quote and talk about with potential sales prospects or people that are saying, yes, I'm not just promising you I'm that secure, I am that secure, and here's a third party saying that why. And so there's a great trust relationship to that. And I can't get over how much time and trust that it saved, both in the sales process or in my vendor relationships, whether it was a bank or a vendor. It was great for us. The second thing is, why is security critical to the business's success? The SOC 2 focuses so much on confidentiality, privacy, security. It's because these are the types of things that when we're assessing a vendor or even a client to take on, we're looking at, will this person be in business in a year or two from now? Like, COVID was a great example of that. They look and say, is this organization thinking and planning for the future? And as far as just talking from the IT guy's perspective, are they taking the proper security things in place overall to make sure that I know my data is safe, to make sure that they're going to be there? So many people are hit by ransomware, they don't have the right backup. It brings their company to a halt. It's our number one new sales lead is from organizations that have gotten ransomware. I can knock on wood. None of our clients have ever had ransomware that had our agent or our stack onto it, which is something we're super proud of, but we spend a tremendous amount of time focusing on that security and making sure that organization isn't going to come to a screeching halt to it. And then lastly is my own shameless plug, we can help. There's so many organizations that I just see go right to the CPA or the auditing firm, or a lot of people think this is a sales pitch, but there's so much that it affects way more than just the IT component to the business. It is making sure the organization will be there. And again, the internal processes, knowing my own organization is following the processes and procedures that we've laid out and having a third party audit it and have me not be the bad guy to it. Like, Charles IT can be that bad guy. Be like, hey, they're really hammering us to make sure we do this. We're getting a SOC 2 audit, instead of you having to bang that drum and like, hey, why aren't you following that process? So we're more than happy to help. I'm more than happy to spend a bunch of time talking to anybody about it and how it's impacted more than just IT. Like, we followed all the right security stuff and we naturally do it because this is our business, but how much it actually really supported our business as an entity in our own processes was big for us.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Foster, for a terrific presentation and taking the time to answer some great questions from our audience. I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to join us today. For the latest happenings, including information on our upcoming webinars and events, please follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook as shown on the screen. And this officially concludes today's webinar. Thanks again for all of your time. Have a great rest of your day, and please stay safe.